Alan Todd. One way or another, I spent much of my life involved with film. Usually small ones, experimental films, and a great deal of that time was spent in teaching filmmaking. Part of the process of making a film is, of course, drawing a storyboard. I must have drawn a lot of storyboards. One thing we accept about them is that they convey a great deal of information. You may have within that single frame, of course there are 24 frames to a second, but the single drawn frame, it will have something about the action, something about possible dialogue, something about camera movement, actor movement. It could be a whole load of information that the director might need to try and make the film. Obviously, a single frame is not a film. You need an awful lot of them to get any sense of time at all. Now, in some ways, that single frame is very much like a painting. We expect a painting to do the same sort of thing, to convey information. Now, there's no rule about what kind of information. You certainly don't have to go putting dialogue on or camera movement, but you do tend to work with a series of symbols, colours, directions, brush marks, all of which convey something. Now, what interests me is the concept of time, because both a single frame and a painting are a distillation of time. Time, though, is difficult. It's a concept. We accept that the sun comes up, the sun goes down as two events in the course of a day. And I think, for a long period of time, they may have been the only events in the day. And if you think back to 2020 and lockdowns for COVID, if you only had two events in the day, time passed very slowly. Perhaps now you have a lot more events in your day. You can cram any number in that you like. Of course, the exact opposite happens. You get the feeling that time is passing very quickly. So what I was interested in with this series that I'm calling Encounter was how to manipulate time through painting. The idea really was simple. For a start, I would limit myself to 7 frames, approximate 7 days of the week. Within each of those frames, and we're talking here some fairly large canvases, you would have visual information that suggested something, and you would have words. Now, as often happens with film, the words and the image you see don't actually relate to each other. It's a very common thing in films. You can have 2 characters in a car talking about the meaning of life. The landscape passes. It's had nothing to do whatever with the conversation. That's the nature of film. It's not real, it's not reality, it's an approximation at best. Now, what I called all of this as an idea is encounter. Now, it's not my term, I borrowed this one. But in attempting to slow down time, I gave the audience the opportunity to stand in front of each of these 7 frames in turn, and we're talking here about a painting that's over 5 meters long, and read the words and try and work out what the image is. What it does is to turn those 7 frames, which may be, 7 of anything, into something very much longer. If it takes you 5 minutes to work your way down the painting, I have literally slowed down time. Now, for me, this was an important piece of research. The power of painting to manipulate people and the time they spend in front of it.
For me, drawing has always been a creative process in its own right. Line and tone can be manipulated endlessly to discover something different, something unexpected. The process of creating Encounter began with a series of life drawings using a variety of models. This gave me insight into forms and realising them on a 2-dimensional surface. They were never intended to be any more than investigations. What followed were 20 drawings where the figure seemed to be in transition. None of these were from a model. Being able to smudge and partially erase removed the idea of an outline. As the figurative forms in the painting, they had to assume an ephemeral quality, not as ghosts, but as transient suggestions of figures moving in space. Redrawing them in a series of pseudo-storyboards, each with 7 unequal divisions, gave each a grounding, an anchoring, but there was no actual ground line. They were anchored to lines and areas. Adding substantial blocks of tone both gave a sense of space and form to the divisions, but there was little sense of positive or negative reading as foreground or background. This was important. When it came to starting on canvas, a decision had to be made as to how to retain the spontaneity of the drawings with a brush. Rapid execution and a continuous line suggested the same kind of ephemeral form in transition. Finding the right words was a challenge. After using fragments of conversation, random text messages and descriptive phrases, I settled on something that suggested a journey without describing one. Essentially, the phrases are poetic constructions. I was aiming for the disassociation that I recognised in film. The figure forms are expressive, the words are expressive, but neither is part of the other, even though they occupy the same space. Stenciling the words onto the surface using a linear font added another layer. This kind of writing comes with packaging as a rule. It labels. There were two versions. The black version behaves quite differently from the white version. The alternating positive and negative resembles a film negative where black is white and vice versa. These two paintings are over 5 meters in length. At that length, it takes a fair while to walk from one end to the other. They are a journey in their own right. In some respects, they could go on forever. This is 7 frames. In film terms, that's less than a third of a second. It certainly takes a lot longer than a third of a second to work out what you've got here as an audience. Now, whether anybody would actually stop for lengths of time, I don't know. But a third of a second encompassed in a 5 meter painting, that's something unexpected.
The Encounter series is an ongoing project. The fascination of time itself and how I can play with it, as well as how I can link words and images without turning them into illustrations of each other, that's the challenge. And I've tried a variety of ways so far, and I think it's going to be a fair while before I come up with an answer as to what the relationship actually is.